There are nights at the Grand Ole Opry when the golden lights glow as they always have. The band is already in place, and the audience waits in a familiar stillness. Not the silence of low expectation, but the silence of those who know that the moment a very small voice rises, the entire hall will have no choice but to listen. That voice belongs to Bill Anderson. They call him Whisperin Bill, not because he cannot sing loudly, but because he chooses not to. He sings in a whisper, as if afraid of shattering the fragile emotions already resting inside the listener's heart. For more than half a century, Bill Anderson has written love songs that lead people back to what they once loved, once lost, once failed to hold on to in time. Still, po folks, Mama sang a song. These are not merely songs. They are slices of life, memories laid gently before us in a voice so tender that no one has the heart to turn away. But there is a quiet paradox that few ever speak of. The man who sang about love with such gentleness could not hold on to a complete home of his own. When the stage lights fade, when the audience drifts away, Bill Anderson often returns to a very different space. One without applause, without an orchestra, where only silence remains. There, he is not a legend. He is simply a man who spent his entire life listening to the emotions of others, yet at times did not know how to live with the emotions closest to his own. The story of Bill Anderson is not one of scandal, nor of loud tragedy. It is a story of silences, of a man who loved deeply, lived softly, and paid the price with a loneliness he never spoke aloud. And perhaps it is precisely from those silences that the whispering voice has endured for so long, as a reminder that sometimes the things that reach us most deeply in life come from the quietest sounds. When Bill Anderson is mentioned, most people believe they already understand him. A small voice, a gentle man, ballads that never disturb anyone, never demand attention. Whisperin Bill, a name that sounds like a complete explanation in itself. They remember still. The love song that makes tired hearts slow down. They remember po folks, a story of people who are poor, yet never lose their dignity. They remember the image of Bill Anderson stepping onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, bowing his head slightly, saying just enough words, and then beginning to sing. No shouting, no showing off. All of it creates a very comforting impression that Bill Anderson is the kind of artist with nothing complicated about him. No scandals, no noise, no troubling shadows. And it is precisely this sense of ease that conceals something essential, because behind that gentle voice is not a simple man. Bill Anderson does not sing softly because he is weak. He sings softly because he has long been accustomed to listening more than speaking. Throughout his career, Bill never tried to become the center of the room. He did not compete with volume, nor did he fight for attention through image. He stepped back and allowed emotion to step forward. That is why listeners so often feel as if he is singing only to them. But that very choice also created a quiet paradox. A man who spends his entire life listening to the hearts of others gradually becomes used to not speaking the things he himself needs to say. The audience believes they know Bill Anderson through his gentle songs, but they do not yet know the price the man who wrote those songs had to pay for that gentleness. And to understand that, we must return to a harder question. Not how beautifully Bill Anderson sang, but how he lived when music was no longer beside him. From here, the story begins to turn in a different direction, not to escape from people, but simply to survive. And perhaps this is the one thing the audience has never truly considered. Bill Anderson did not become quiet because he was weak. He became quiet because, from a very early age, he learned how to live alone within the world of sound. To understand that, we must go back far earlier, even before the lights of Nashville. In the late 1940s, in the American South after the Great Depression, Bill Anderson grew up in a family of few words. Not the kind of poverty shaped by tragedy, nor a childhood marked by upheaval, but a childhood defined by silence. Emotions were not discussed. People lived, endured, and went to sleep. On evenings like those, Bill did not seek closeness from people. He found it in the radio placed in the corner of the room. From very early on, he learned a quiet lesson that would shape his entire life. Emotions can exist without dialogue. All they require is listening. By the mid-1950s, when he left Georgia to attend college and work as a DJ for a local radio station, that habit did not disappear. It simply changed form. Bill spoke to thousands of listeners every night without ever seeing a face. He connected with an entire community, while still maintaining a safe distance. No one asked whether he was happy or sad. No one demanded that he explain himself. Music did that for him. Then, in 1957, Bill wrote City Lights. In 1958, Ray Price recorded the song, and it unexpectedly reached the top of the country charts. That moment did more than change Bill Anderson's career. It changed the way he learned to survive. From then on, Bill understood this. Music always responded to him faster than people ever did. Music does not wait. It does not sulk. It does not get hurt when it is forgotten. By the late 1950s, Nashville opened its doors. Bill stepped into a world where he was always needed. As long as he kept writing, kept singing, kept moving. Overnight drives, studios lit through the dark, hotel rooms so alike they made remembering the city's name unnecessary. And in each of those places, Bill carried with him the one thing he knew best, just enough silence to create. It was not that Bill did not know his family needed him. He did. But he also knew another truth. At home, without music, he did not know who he was supposed to be. And so, almost naturally, Bill Anderson began living in the way that allowed him to breathe. He chose places that did not require him to explain his silence. He chose spaces where a pen and a melody were enough to justify his existence. This was not an escape. It was a survival mechanism. Yet it was also from that same late 1950s moment that a quiet fracture began to form. Between Bill Anderson on stage and Bill Anderson in private life. A fracture without noise, without explosion, but one that grew wider with each passing year. And later on, no matter how many gentle love songs he wrote, he would never be able to close it completely. By the late 1950s, once Bill Anderson had come to understand that music was the place where he could exist without having to explain himself, he carried that same habit into married life, without ever realizing it. By day, Bill wrote songs. By night, Bill stood on stage. And in between those two, he learned how to live in silence. When City Lights became a major breakthrough in 1958, Nashville began calling his name more insistently. The trips grew longer, the nights on stage came back to back. The hotel rooms so alike that he no longer needed to turn on the light to know where he was. Bill felt at ease in that rhythm, because there, no one demanded that he stay, and no one asked why he was silent. But home was different. By the late 1960s, as his career was rising, Bill's first marriage slowly began to fracture. There was no explosive moment, no betrayal, no scandal, only a prolonged absence, long enough to become a painful habit. Bill could tell other people's stories through music, yet he did not know how to tell his own through words. After the first divorce, Bill did not stop. He did what came most naturally. He returned to work. In the early 1970s, as country music entered a period of major change, Bill Anderson remained steadily present, writing, singing, appearing on television, standing firm at the Grand Ole Opry. From the outside, he appeared to be a rare symbol of stability in a Nashville that was rapidly shifting. But behind that stability lay another truth. Bill began to equate presence with existence. As long as he showed up where he was needed, he felt safe. As long as his performance schedule was full, he did not have to face the empty spaces waiting at home. The second marriage came under those circumstances. Bill was not searching for loud compensation. He was searching for a sense of normalcy. But normalcy is the hardest thing to hold on to for someone who has grown accustomed to living by schedules and stage lights. The same conflicts repeated themselves, not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of presence. And once again, silence followed him home, sat down at the dinner table, and stayed. By the time of the third marriage, Bill had already passed the midpoint of his life. He believed he had gained enough experience to hold on to a home, but some habits formed very early, like using music in place of dialogue, are not easily changed. In the end, even that final hope closed quietly. The most painful thing was not the 3 divorces. It was that Bill Anderson could not point to a single moment to blame. There was no day everything collapsed. There were only days that passed. Days when he was present on stage, but absent at home. And from here, a truth slowly comes into focus. Music saved Bill Anderson from emptiness, but it also took away his ability to fully remain with another person. The most painful thing was not the 3 divorces. It was that Bill Anderson could not identify a specific moment to accuse. There was no day when everything fell apart. No door slammed shut. Only long, drawn-out evenings, rooms emptied of conversation, and a man accustomed to whispering on stage, who did not know what to say when he came home. Music gave Bill Anderson a place to stay, but that same music gradually taught him how to be alone. And when each marriage quietly came to an end, Bill did not rage. He did not resent. He simply returned to his writing desk, gently set the pen down, and continued to whisper. After his final marriage came quietly to an end, Bill Anderson did not try to fill the empty space. He did not rush into a new chapter to prove anything. Bill simply stayed. He stayed in the quiet house in Nashville. He stayed with mornings without conversation. He stayed with a pace of life far slower than the years he spent on the road. There was no declared decision, no promise made to himself. Just one day, then the next, Bill realized that he was no longer searching for a new home. Not because he feared being hurt, but because he had grown accustomed to silence. And that silence, somehow, no longer frightened him. In the mornings, Bill wakes early. He makes coffee, sits at the table, and places a blank sheet of paper in front of him. The same familiar pencil, the same unhurried way of writing, one line at a time. At an age when many have already stepped away from creative work, Bill continues to write, not to chase the charts, not to prove that he is still relevant. He writes because it is the only way he knows how to speak to the world without having to speak aloud. On some evenings, after leaving the stage at the Grand Ole Opry, Bill does not attend parties. He drives home. The streets of Nashville thin out, The lights fall away behind him. In the familiar room, he hangs up his coat, sits down, and lets the silence flow in. No one is waiting, but no one has been abandoned either. Close friends say that Bill is not bitter. He does not complain about what he has lost. When asked why he never remarried, he simply smiles, a very small smile, and then turns the conversation to a new melody, a lyric still unfinished. To Bill, music was never a substitute. It was the only home he knew how to remain in completely. Old age arrives slowly but surely. His health is no longer what it once was. The performance schedule grows thinner, yet Bill still appears, not to remind people that he is still there, but to keep a quiet appointment with himself. Each time he steps onto the stage, he lowers his head, gently touches the microphone, and sings as if he were speaking to a single person in the hall. At this stage of his life, Bill Anderson no longer tries to repair the past. He does not attempt to justify what has already happened. He lives as someone who has accepted that some things cannot be held, yet can still be loved in a different way. And on windless Nashville nights, when the final notes fade away, Bill remains seated alone, not empty, not resentful. Just a man who has traveled a very long way with music and has chosen to stay with it all the way to the end. There came a moment when Bill Anderson realized he was standing in a very strange position in Nashville, no longer in the middle of the race, not outside of it either. He stayed. As the years passed, familiar faces slowly disappeared from behind the scenes of the Grand Ole Opry. The people who once stood beside him in dressing rooms, shared late-night coffee, laughed loudly behind the curtain, were now remembered only by name. Bill still stepped onto the stage, bowed to the audience, then returned to a space that grew increasingly sparse. No one said it out loud, yet everyone felt it. He had become the last witness of an era. At an age when many artists choose to rest, Bill appeared in a different way. He did not try to rejuvenate himself. He did not change his style. He did not chase trends. He simply sat quietly with younger artists, listening as they sang, listening as they spoke, then offering a few very brief words. No lecturing, no raised voice, just words that were enough, the same way he always sang. When Country's Family Reunion was born, Bill did not stand at the center as a star. He sat among everyone else, like a keeper of the flame. Those gatherings did not need dazzling lights. All they needed were guitars, a few familiar voices, and stories no one rushed to interrupt. Bill understood that when music is no longer a competition, it returns to its true nature, a place where people recognize one another. There were evenings when, after the program ended, Bill stayed longer than everyone else. He gathered the sheet music, touched the guitar, looked around the empty room. Not with sadness, not with excessive nostalgia, just a long, steady look, as if committing it to memory one more time, fully. In rare conversations, Bill did not speak much about achievements. He spoke about patience, about not needing to shout in order to be heard, about how sometimes staying is itself a courageous choice. Younger artists listened to him not because he was a legend, but because they sensed something difficult to name. The calm of someone who has traveled far enough to no longer need to prove anything. And so, as Nashville continued to change, Bill Anderson remained, not as a shadow of the past, but as a quiet marker. A man who neither clung to his golden years nor abandoned them. He simply stood there long enough for later generations to understand that some values do not need to be shouted in order to endure. He no longer runs after time. He lets time pass by him. There is something very strange when Bill Anderson is mentioned. People rarely call him great with ornate praise. They simply say, his music is there. There when a marriage comes to an end. There when someone drives alone through the night. There when a person needs a voice that does not judge, does not advise, only quietly understands. Bill Anderson did not leave country music with a movement. He left behind a way of existing. Songs like Still, Po' Folks, Mama Sang a Song, Tips of My Fingers do not survive on climaxes. They survive on patience, on the courage to move slowly in a world that constantly pushes to speak louder, faster, more forcefully. Bill proved that sometimes simply telling the truth, very softly, is enough to reach very deep. Many generations of artists have passed through his music. Some have sung it intact. Some have borrowed only its spirit. But what they share is this. They understand that Bill Anderson opened a door, a place where country music does not need to strain itself to prove anything. There, emotion is not forced into a message. It is allowed to exist in its fragile, natural form. In Nashville, Bill is remembered not through records, but through very small stories. That he always arrived early. That he listened more than he spoke. That when a young artist struggled, unsure whether they were big enough, Bill would simply say, "Don't rush. Not everyone needs to become noise." Perhaps Bill Anderson's greatest legacy does not lie in the number of songs he wrote or the number of years he stood on stage. It lies in the fact that he allowed country music to be gentle without being weak, to be quiet without disappearing, to remain in a way entirely its own. And when that whispering voice rises, listeners do not feel as though they are hearing a legend. They simply feel that someone is sitting beside them. In his later years, Bill Anderson did not withdraw from the world. He simply moved more slowly. The performance schedule was no longer crowded. Long-distance travel became less frequent. Yet Bill still appeared on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, not out of obligation, but as a habit deeply woven into the rhythm of his life. He stepped out, stood in the familiar wooden circle, placed his hand on the microphone, and waited for the hall to settle. No hurry, no reminders. Silence found its way on its own. His voice was no longer as rounded as it had been in his youth, but that did not weaken him. On the contrary, each line now carried more breath, more lived experience. Bill did not try to hide his age. He allowed it to be present in his voice. The same way he had always allowed emotion to be present in his music. Away from the stage, Bill lived a very simple life. Quiet mornings, meals with few people, short conversations with longtime friends. He did not seek to compensate for what had passed, nor did he try to rewrite his life story into something more beautiful. He simply lived within the rhythm he was still able to keep. There were still days when Bill sat at the writing desk, even if he did not always complete a song. Sometimes it was only a few lines, sometimes an unfinished idea. But sitting there holding the pencil weight was enough. For Bill, creating was no longer a goal. It was a way of staying with himself. Those who met him during this period often noticed the same thing. Bill Anderson was deeply at peace, not sad, not regretful. He did not speak much about the past, nor did he seem concerned with how he would be remembered. Perhaps because he had already understood this truth. What needed to remain had already remained. And so, in those final years, Bill Anderson did not search for something new. He simply held on to what was true. There is an evening at the Grand Ole Opry when the soft golden lights slowly fade. The band has left the stage. The audience has gone home. At the center of the familiar wooden circle, the microphone stands still. as it has stood there through an entire lifetime. Bill Anderson no longer needs to step out to prove anything. He has sung long enough, written enough, remained deeply enough in the memories of those who once listened. Bill's life does not close with a climax. It closes with silence. The thing he understood better than anyone. He did not keep his marriages. He did not keep a complete home. But he kept something far more difficult: absolute honesty with his own emotions. In a world that constantly urges people to speak louder, faster, stronger, Bill Anderson chose to whisper. And in doing so, he left country music with something exceedingly rare: gentleness that does not ask for permission. When that voice falls silent, it does not disappear. It lives in songs played after midnight, in those who choose to listen instead of argue, in hearts that once loved deeply and lost quietly. If this story made you pause for a moment, if you have ever seen yourself in a very small lyric by Whisperin Bill, please like and subscribe to help us continue preserving stories that do not need to be loud, but deserve to be heard all the way through. And if you'd like, leave a comment below. Which Bill Anderson song has stayed with you the longest?